Doug Williams is off on safari again, but we have an actual baseball player today to talk about the Mets. He's trade deadline, on-field stuff. The best analyst in New York, Todd Zeile, is here. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shea Anything Podcast. Doug is once again off on safari. Todd and I actually drove him to the airport. Todd, it was embarrassing. Remember he had that big white hat and like the khaki suit, like it was the 1890s or something. It was very Doug, but you know, I guess that's what he's off to the jungle somewhere.
His favorite film is Jumanji, so that would fit. So
that's right. That's his. That Jumanji is probably Doug's oldest cultural reference. Actually, every time we try to talk about a movie like too deep into the 90s, he has no idea what we're talking about. But we're here today, and the first thing that I'm going to do is read the Verizon ad better than Doug ever has. First, I'm going to tell you I'm going to remind you to subscribe to the Shea Anything Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And here's where I'm really going to shine. You ready? Shea Anything is now brought to you by Verizon. 5G built right for the Mets from the network that more people rely on, only on Verizon. How was that? I went with slow and dramatic. I'm not a professional, but I'd like to think that was pretty good.
Should I hold up my Verizon my Verizon equipment just to just really
drive the point home? We're Verizon people here. We love the service. We love the sponsorship. We couldn't rave more about what Verizon does. So I've done the read, and now we've done like a casual conversation about Verizon, everything they paid for, everything they could have asked. And now we're going to talk about baseball. The nitty-gritty grunt work part of my job is like figuring out if the Mets are going to trade for Jose Barrios. The true joy of my job is continuing to learn from people who know and have played more about what I'm watching. And the beautiful part about baseball is there's always more to learn, at least for a semi-trained eye like myself. So I'm very pleased to have you here, Todd. And there's three Mets hitters that I wanted to focus on before we got into any trade deadline stuff, and just bear down a little bit more on what we've seen, big picture in the season, and what we're seeing now. I want to start with McNeil. The first portion of Jeff's career, it was obviously like DJ LeMahieu light, or even DJ LeMahieu, the next DJ LeMahieu, contact, using the whole fields. Much has been made kind of about the idea that he's possibly become a little bit more homer happy. And now, to my eye, it seems like he may be caught in between two approaches. So I'm wondering if you think that's fair, what you're seeing from McNeil, and if you're able to identify even what kind of hitter he is at this point in his career, and if you have any concerns about that caught in between kind of thing.
That's a lot. But I think first and foremost, I think you're accurate with what we saw out of him coming up. I think he was a guy that felt like he had to prove a lot of people wrong. He was a guy that was, a contact guy. He was not necessarily considered a huge prospect. There was questions about his defense. There was, and he was a guy that kind of plays with this chip on his shoulder. He has a bit of, he's always reminded me a little bit of Greg Jeffries in the sense that Greg, I think, got the most out of his ability, was a great contact hitter, and was angry every time he made an out, whether he hit a ball in the nose or struck out. And you saw that kind of fire and that sort of chip on the shoulder of Jeff McNeil, especially early on when he first got here. And you saw that it was sort of his, I think it was his personal mantra to make sure that he always had a tough at bat, always made it tough for the pitchers to get him out. And as you know, he was so aggressive on the first pitch, you started to wonder whether or not that could sustain itself. And he had so much success on the first pitch that you figured it was going to be a matter of time before the league started adjusting to that. So I think, like anybody that comes to the big leagues, like any player that's had early success, there's going to be adjustments around the league. The key to being a long-term successful big league player is to be able to make those adjustments back. You've got to be able to adjust to the way the league adjusts to you. I think the league started figuring, don't give him a good first pitch and pound him in, because he likes to get extended. He likes to use that left side of the field. And for a while, he was getting beat inside, driving balls foul. If he got the barrel on it, it was foul. And I think that is what made him sort of have to evolve to being a guy that became a little more pull conscious. And then you saw that power, especially 2019, the ball was jumping anyway. You saw that power in the second half of that season. And that's probably a little bit enticing to a guy that was considered a contact average type of hitter, but not a guy that anybody counted on to drive the ball out of the ballpark or drive in runs. And so that second half of 2019, I think he did get a little bit enamored with driving the ball out of the ballpark and using that power and pulling, and he lost some of that ability to have those tough at bats, go deep in the count and shoot a ball to left field and beat the shift. But I think there was a lot of debate as to which guy is better in today's day and age. The guy that hits the ball out of the ballpark, strikes out more, has a lesser average, but the OPS is high and the RBIs are there. That may be considered a more valuable commodity in today's game. Yeah. So I think it was tough for Jeff to figure out which guy he really wanted to be. And I think he liked the power guy a little bit more. He got bigger and stronger last year. You could see it physically. He's bigger. He's a stronger guy. I think it may have taken a little bit away from his sort of ability to just be straight bat to ball skills. He's a little tighter earlier on in the season. I feel like he's loosening up a little bit now. So that's a lot of exposition about the kind of hitter that he is. Now, I was at the game yesterday. I saw he had a really good at bat yesterday. Stayed on that changeup with 2 strikes and drove something in the gap. And you're starting to see during this last hit streak that he's putting together some tougher at bats. But I think to your point, you're still not quite sure what you're going to get out of Jeff and what you should expect out of Jeff. Especially with the issues with the legs and the injuries and the fatigue and that kind of stuff. So he's been perplexing to me this season. And I think he's a guy that this Mets team really could use the early version of Jeff, in my opinion. I think the early version of Jeff that is always going to be a tough out is hitting more at the top of the lineup as opposed to 6th or 7 in the lineup. I think he's a guy that can, especially when Pete and Michael and Dom and those guys start to heat up in the middle of that lineup and can drive the ball out of the park, he's a guy that you want to have on base. And if they're going to have to keep him down in the order, he's a guy that can start a rally again. I don't think he necessarily needs to be the guy that's counted on to hit 25 jacks.
You hit on a couple of things there that have been on my mind a little bit with McNeil. Number one, I think it's a really good point about the value that's placed on power hitters. So it's easy for a hitting coach, it's easy for a commentator to say, come on, use the whole field, spray the ball around, hit for average. I just mentioned DJ LeMahieu after winning a couple of batting titles. He signed a $90 million contract. That's good money, but if you're a slugger, you get into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And I don't mean that as a knock on McNeil. I actually meant it to say I understand why wouldn't anyone in a job want to do the thing that makes you more valuable. So you wonder about that. And also you brought up the temperament thing, and that's interesting. I didn't know that was Jeffrey's temperament. I know I've seen Paul O'Neill kind of have that, the baseball term obviously is red ass. And the idea that when a guy has that, when you play with a guy like that, do you think that gets in his way? And secondarily, do you think that can be the kind of thing that he has to be careful about, not alienating other guys and looking selfish because no matter what the score is, he's pissed off about his own pop-up? Or like, how much of a red flag is that red ass kind of behavior to you and a teammate?
I think it's a really fine line. I think you brought up 2 people that are, I played with or against for a lot of years with Jeffries and with Paulie O'Neill. And I think the difference there is we used to tease Jeff and Greg Jeffries. And, the saying that came along with Greg was 2 for 4, what's the score? Which is essentially, hey, if I got my 2 hits today, you know what? I'm good. I'm happy in the clubhouse. If we won a great 3-2 knock and I went 0 for 5, I'm pissed off when I come into the clubhouse. And it was that sort of attitude. And he was a guy that wanted the team to win, but the attitude that was expressed on the field during play gave that different kind of view. And I think it did wear on some teammates at times that, especially considering, and this is the thing that was kind of similar about Jeff, is that when Greg was doing that, he was hitting 340 and, and then still getting upset about going 1 for 4 when guys are, struggling to hit 250 in the big leagues and still trying to do what's best for the team. And so when Jeff's hitting 330 and he's been the leading hitter in all of baseball over the last couple of years, and then has 2 hits and then lines out or hits a hard ground ball and gets upset, it's those types of moments that teammates then start to get a little bit rubbed by. Now, you talk about Paul O'Neill. Paulie was always angry. He was mad every time he missed a strike or got out or missed a play. But he always, to me, felt like he was angry and pushed himself, but he was a team guy. I mean, he would run into walls and do whatever it took to forward the team. I don't think any of his teammates ever felt like he was a selfish player because of his red ass and attitude. And so I think that's the part that you're talking about that's a really fine line that Jeff walks, I think, with this Mets team, because this Mets team, especially this year, I think there's been a lot of early talk about how connected they are, how on the same page they are, how winning is the only thing, how it's the next man up. And I believe that even if that was talk early, I think they really kind of bought into that. I think you're starting to feel that and see that, especially with the advent of the bench mob and all the additions from everybody else. And so with that type of mentality, then this sort of over emotional red ass kind of thing can then start to alienate. I think in this current version of the Mets team, I think that's where it could start creating some problems. And I do actually think I've seen a little bit of a temperament of that with Jeff over the last maybe 3 to 4 weeks. And he's made some tough outs. He's upset, but he still goes about his business. He's going, he's there to be a part of the celebrations when other guys do good things. And it's those little things, even if there have to be forced because it's not your personal nature, that is important to be considered a team guy and to not get alienated in a group that seems to be very, very tight right now.
Next guy I want to ask you about is the probably the most placid demeanor on the team, Michael Conforto. None of those issues, but my question with him is much more basic. And so it's just, have you seen anything this year as he struggled that is new? Any additional holes in his swing? Anything about what he does at the plate that you say, oh, wow, that's a concern. I've never seen that before? Or are you simply seeing a guy that needs the reps, needs to be healthy, needs to get hot? Anything different at all or concern?
There hasn't been anything very different. I mean, I compare his swing all the time to look for little things to analyze and break down on pre and post. And there's been a couple of times where I see him as in between. Louis has talked about it. Michael has talked about it himself. And in between, to me, is something that is really easy to understand as a guy that's played and really hard to articulate to the fans to make it make sense, because it's such a subtle difference when you've got less than half a second to react to a ball, and the off speed and the high velo might be 10 miles an hour different. And how do you find a way to be on time to cover both? And it's really challenging. And Michael was, I think, trying to wait as much as he could early in the season and was getting beat on fastballs up and in. He's got that one little hole on the high velo fastball on top of the zone on the inside. Brandon Nimmo has a very similar spot. Brandon's learned to kind of fight it off at times. Michael has had a tendency to not be able to get the hands on top of the baseball right there and have a lot of swings and misses, which then makes it feel like, as a hitter, like you're getting beat on a ball that you could get to. So you want to start a little earlier. You want to get the barrel out to it. As soon as you want to start a little bit earlier, then as soon as they throw that other off speed or pull the string or go away from you, then you're out in front a little bit and you've lost your power and you seem to kind of wave at balls. And that's the in between that I think they were talking about. And then the other thing with Michael is a couple of years ago in spring training, I had that chance to work with him in the batting cage and talk to him about some of the things that he knows are his own triggers when things aren't going right and how to correct them. And a big key to him is his stride. And he talks about the fact that when he starts to get that in between, he's getting beat on the fastball up and he's chasing the off speed away because it feels like it's away to him. So he strides more closed to try to be able to reach that outside pitch, but that then cuts him off on the inside pitch. So it's technical, but I've been watching his stride and it was getting too closed off, which was making it harder for him to be able to get the barrel to the ball in the inner part of the plate. And so in the last 2 weeks, since I did a couple of the analysis, I did the breakdown on the show, I've seen him go back to more of the straight stride, and it allows his hips to come through. It allows his hands to be a little quicker. And I think the 2-homer game that he had was a perfect indication of what Michael's doing right when he's going well. He had an up and in fastball that he was able to get the barrel to on the inside part of the plate and pull for a home run. He hit a left-handed breaking ball to left field for a base hit, waiting on the ball late on a really good at bat, 2-strike at bat. And then he got a ball in his joy zone down and out over the plate that he drove to straightaway center field. So he was on time for all 3 pitches. His barrel was able to get to the ball. His hips were able to clear. And that to me is the sign that here it comes, because you've seen when he gets hot, he can be as hot and cold as anybody, but when he gets hot, he really gets hot. So I thought that was going to be sort of the catalyst to really get him over the edge and start seeing, maybe a month of Michael really starting to be productive.
So when you're looking at whether you're seeing cold or hot Conforto, you're looking at the stride, and that tells you whether
at his feet and whether he closes himself off too much. And that's what that means is his front foot strides too much towards home plate as opposed to towards the pitcher. When he strides towards home plate, it makes his hips close and it's harder to get the barrel through the zone. When he goes towards the pitcher, the hips are more easily able to open up and get the barrel to the ball because he hits pretty close to the plate anyway, so he can cover the outside part of the plate without having to close himself off. So he knows that's a trigger for himself. And so he gave me that insight to be able to really watch him and kind of analyze what it looks like he's doing. And that's where he gets himself in between. It's a combination of those things that creates, I think, some of the his swing still looks beautiful, but he'll hit balls a little bit in on the hands, a little bit on the barrel, not quite, on the label, not quite get the barrel to the ball. And then all of a sudden it'll shift. He'll feel like he's locked in, and you'll see these really good quality at bats like I think he's been showing a little bit more lately.
Last hitter question is Dom Smith in the breaking ball. Obviously last year he was such a good breaking ball hitter. This year he struggled with that early, the off speed. And not so much lately. Obviously, he's been better lately, but I'm just wondering what you see with that particular pitch with him and what the difference is. Is it something similar where you can look at something in his mechanics that show you whether he's on time or in between?
Yeah, it's not too dissimilar from Michael. And I know that sometimes when analysts break down swings, you go to a lot of, sort of buzzwords or key things, which is balance and that core. But with Dom, he is such an unusual hitter in the sense that his barrel stays in the zone longer than anybody else, at least on the Mets, and as much as anybody in the game. Maybe LeMahieu's another guy that has his barrel stay in the zone a long time. And so what that means is Dom can sometimes even be out in front, but keeps his hands back and is able to keep the barrel in the zone. Early on, I think Dom was making sure that he was on time for the fastball, and much like Conforto started to get pitched with a lot of off speed and was out on his front foot a lot, lunging a little bit, rolling balls over to the right side. And ironically, I think what's helped him kind of get back into his balanced position and drive the ball deeper in the strike zone is what's gone along with his season this year is his great success against lefties. A lot of lefties, pitch and Dom try to go hard in and then use the breaking ball away. Dom likes the ball moving away from him. He doesn't mind the ball moving away from him because he likes to get extended. A lot of guys aren't like that. And so him seeing all these lefties and getting a chance to play against all the lefties all the time now, instead of being platoon, has made him have to be more disciplined on the lefty to wait on the off speed, to anticipate the ball moving away from him. And you see he's putting really good at bats together on lefties where he's staying back. And I think just by virtue of that, it's kind of got him back to the right timing on the right-handers as well, because he's recognizing that he doesn't have to rush out to get the baseball. His hands are quick, and early on in the season, in the cool weather and all the different, your hands never quite feel quite right. He's a guy that hits with his hands and that quick bat. And I feel like right now he's gotten back to that relaxed. I used to say it looks like he's sitting in a rocking chair up there, where he just relaxes his hands and takes a nice breath, and it looks like he's playing possum up there, and then his hands are lightning through the zone. He's gotten back to that more, so it's given him a chance to recognize pitches out of the pitcher's hands more, so he's on time better with the breaking balls, and that's the key to his success, I think.
Question that just popped into my head before we move on to the trade deadline stuff. Have you noticed, yes or no, on whether this Mets team seems to have any interest in like picking up on sequences from second base, picking up on tippers, stuff like that? I mean, I have a particular interest in this from the research I've done, but we hearing you talk about being in between, what to anticipate, just makes me think that if Dom or Conforto or any of these guys, if they were one of those teams that had that kind of thing going where they like to figure the pitch out, that would really help with some of these issues. Do they seem into that to you?
I don't know that I've seen, and I think Lindor is one of those guys that's an intelligent player, always looking for an edge. I think he looks for sign. He's a guy that at shortstop makes sure that he knows what the sign sequence is all the time on defense. It's something that he knows is important. And so I think by virtue of that, he probably has a pretty good sensibility about how to pick up sign sequencing from second base. So nothing to the point of using technology or anything.
No. I'm talking about the legal stuff.
Piece. Yeah. I think there's a few of the guys that on this Mets team do feel like they can try to garner an advantage from second base if the pitchers are going to give it away or the catchers are going to give it away. And ironically, I was at the game yesterday and I noticed it was late innings and McCann, it was the final at bat. It was Bichette hitting against Edwin with Vladdy on second base, and he got run the count to full with Bichette, and he came to his stretch, and McCann quickly called timeout and went to the mound. And Vladdy, through that entire sequence, had been watching the sequence, and I think Vladdy was able to kind of give Bichette a little nod as to what he thought might be coming there 3-2. McCann, very astute, very aware, goes out, calls timeout. They go out, they decide on a pitch without having to give signs. He goes back in and strikes him out on the 3-2 slider. So I think that stuff all exists. I love that part of the game. I think it's a part of the game that has been around for 100 years and is still something that makes it interesting out there. Yeah. But it was just interesting that I happened to notice that.
Yeah, that is interesting.
During the game.
That's the kind of stuff. Yeah, like different Mets teams, obviously, like other teams have been more into that or not. Like I talked to David Wright, research for my book, and he was like the 07 team because they had Beltran, Sean Green, guys that were really good at legally picking signs. Beltran, right. What he did later is a different story. That they were just so into that, and other Mets teams that David played on were not. So I was just curious if your eye had picked up on anything like that.
I think I've told you this before, but there's been the same way. There's been some teams that I've been with that don't even make an effort at all, don't care at all. You can be given first sign at second base and nobody would care or do anything. And then I've been with other teams that if they can't pick up the signs, they try to look for a catcher moving too early and setting up, because if catchers come in on you, it's going to be, it's hard, right? Unless it's like a slider, left-handed slider coming to the right hand or whatever. And so you can kind of get a feel for hard or soft by the catcher's positioning. And I've been really paying a lot of attention to Nito this year because I think earlier in the season, Nito moved really early. And I thought as early as he moved, I thought maybe some hitters could detect what that pitch might be based on his early movement. And it's a lot of movement. It's not just a subtle movement. He wants to go way outside when he wants to pitch there or go way up for some. And then I've noticed that in his last, I don't know, call it 5 or 6 starts, he gives the signs, stays on the one knee, waits until the pitcher's in his motion, then moves late to give that target that he's aware of. And, I think I've always, we talked about this before. I pay attention to all those little subtle things because I think they're really interesting in the game and any little advantage.
It's fascinating. Yeah. That's interesting about Nito. I didn't know that. Sanchez and Mike Zunino in Tampa are two guys that have been known that have to be careful because they could tip with the way they move. Sanchez for the Yankees. This has been so interesting. I'm way overdue in telling our listeners that they are listening to the Shea Anything podcast. They probably know that because they've come this far with us, Todd. But what they might not know because they got so wrapped up in what we were saying is that I said in the beginning, and we'll repeat, that it's brought to you by Verizon. That's 5G built right for the Mets. It's from the network that more people rely on. And I just want to say again that it's only on Verizon. How's that? I think that was pretty good. Jeff's giving me like it's okay. I think I'm giving it some drama, some cadence that's different from what Doug generally brings. We are late on talking about the trade deadline because that was interesting conversation. I'm just going to bring up a couple things, Todd, and then ask you.
I was just rambling on about the hitters because I don't like to talk trades. That's your job.
I think that what we were just talking about is more interesting, and I wish there were more time and space on the baseball internet for that kind of thing. It's why I wrote a book about it. But the trade deadline stuff is what people do like that stuff as well. They're passionate about their team. They want to know what they're going to do. I get it, but this is the nitty gritty. But there's an interesting piece of nitty gritty because I was told last night from a very reliable, high level person that the Mets are going to make a call on Max Scherzer. Not particularly hopeful that they're necessarily going to be able to get him, that Mike Rizzo would trade in the division, but Mets are in on Scherzer. The Mets are not in on Jose Barrios, and the difference there is they're looking for rental pitchers. They don't have to give up much from the farm system. Scherzer is going to be a free agent. Barrios is under control, and they're looking for potentially a third base bat, an infield bat. The names aren't going to surprise you, whether it's Chris Bryant or Trevor Story or Josh Donaldson. Or the next couple of days will work that out. And those are two different approaches. Do you trade a J.D. Davis or even potentially a McNeil to get one of those veteran bats? Do you just trade a couple prospects to get a rental pitcher? The only thing I'm going to do, Todd, I'm not going to ask you to have inside information on this, but I'm going to appoint you the GM of the Mets for the next 2-3 minutes and ask you which path you would travel if you were trying to get this team into the World Series. What would you do over the next couple of days of the things I just kind of laid out?
Look, I think, I think with being the interim GM right now that you've made me, I know that I've got an owner that wants to win and it's willing to make some moves. So that's obviously of great importance. But look, I've talked a lot this season about the fact that I think the Mets are in this position that they're in right now because they've had great starting pitching and bullpen in this first half of the season. As the more they get banged up and the more their bullpen gets overused because of the starting pitching depth being depleted, my feeling on this was, hey, it's about time for the offense to start to click because there's always been confidence that this offense should be able to put runs on the board. And if they can put runs on the board, they can take some of the pressure off that rotation and that bullpen, and they can start winning games 8-3, 8-5, as opposed to, the however many one-run games that they've had in the first 80 games. So with that being said, I think what you are seeing is the offense starting to come around to the point that I do believe that they're going to be able to score runs. And I feel like getting another piece that is going to be somebody that's got to fit into a team that's pretty tight and that the offense is just starting to click as a group, is less valuable than getting an arm. So if it was my, my first priority I'd be all in on a guy like Scherzer as a rental. That makes sense. I certainly think that the reason for that is also that you have to at least make the assumption for years to come that you're going to have Noah and you're going to have Carrasco and you're going to have a healthy DeGrom. And you like what you've seen out of Tyler and McGill. You've got Stroman as a possibility. So I don't think it makes as much sense to try to deplete your farm system or make a huge blockbuster trade for a top of the rotation guy right now, because I think that's going to prove to be something that's not as needed in the future. And what I think is needed right now is some added depth to that rotation and maybe even a bullpen arm to try to fill some of those gaps as well. I think that's more of a priority than getting a Chris Bryant or a Trevor Story as another bat and potential piece to fit into that lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think your Joaquin Sorias or your Tyler Andersons or Michael Pinedas or guys like that are probably the most likely way that they go for exactly the reason that you state. We've got two this day in Mets histories before we wrap up. Both good ones. One that I was at and one that I don't believe you were at, but you may have been. The first one is Matt Harvey's debut in the desert. I covered that game. He struck out 11 Diamondbacks. It was really a dramatic night because there was a lot of questions in the organization over whether this guy was ready. And he comes up with such a flair for the dramatic, as I said, striking out 11, just looking like that. You remember how depressed of a state that team was in over several years at that time. And all of a sudden it's like, whoa, we got a stud. We got a guy. He's pitching better for Baltimore this year. I don't know if you've had the chance to see him other than when he pitched against the Mets. I've seen him a few times here and there. He's got a new approach, the two-seam changeup. Sometimes it looks okay. Sometimes it really doesn't. I don't know. What do you think that's a guy that could help a contender? Or you think that's a guy that's probably bound to look back on his Mets days?
If you're wondering about helping the Mets as a reboot, I think that's probably too much to ask of him. I think there's a lot of water under the bridge there that is probably best left there. And because he left in such a sort of inauspicious way, it probably makes more sense to just keep the separation. But I've watched him on a couple of occasions, and look, he's a guy that's trying to resurrect a career or at least hang on to one and has to reinvent himself a little bit. And by the way, if you look around baseball, you're probably the first one that knows this more than I do. The high velo up in the zone guys are having less success than a lot of the guys that are now pitching to corners, going back down in the zone and getting ground balls and contact. So look, it's not like you can't figure out a way to win that way. There's a lot of guys out there doing it. You got to probably bury that part of your ego that was once, a dominant, fireballer.
You make an interesting point there because Harvey's new approach before the sticky stuff cracked down, as I said before, was two-seam changeup. Those are the two pitches that the sticky stuff doesn't help. Less spin. So that's interesting. I mean, the results have been a little bit better lately. You're always rooting for the guy because it's been a tough road for him, but I think it remains to be seen if that's still sustainable. July 26, 2004, David Wright hit his first major league home run. You were probably on that team.
There.
Yeah. You were there. Yeah. You remember that home run?
I'm trying to remember the home run. I don't, because we talked about this the other day, only in the sense that I think we've talked about this, that, around the All-Star break of that year, I had already, had announced that I was retiring and going into that season, retiring. I got an offer, to discuss an extension just past the All-Star break, or right around the All-Star break. I was swinging the bat okay. And the reasoning that I was given was that they wanted David to spend the full year in AAA. He was really coming along great. They didn't want to rush him to the big leagues. And so they wanted me to stick there and then be there with him the next year. I reiterated that I had made the decision and I was going to be hanging it up. And I think, days later, so it was a few days later, he was in the big leagues. And, they said, hey, you guys stick together. And I've told you this before, he didn't need any mentoring. He was ready to go the day that he got there. He was mature. He had, the game didn't surprise him. And he was an amazing talent and player. So he started killing it right away. And I remember, the early home run. And by the way, he and I, one thing that was fun is on my very last game of my career, I homered in my last at bat, but he homered in that game as well. So we both went out with a homer against the last time the Montreal Expos ever took the field. So that was.
It's impossible to speculate on this kind of thing. It's sort of it's an impossible question, but he's still only 38 years old. And you just wonder, talent-wise and skill-wise, he's such a solid player. Solid doesn't even do him justice, obviously. He's a borderline great player when he was at his best. If that spinal stenosis hadn't hit, you just wonder. You wonder if he'd still be playing. You wonder what he would have accomplished. What do you think 38-year-old David Wright is doing if he'd been able to stay healthy? Not that his career is a tragedy. He had a great career, but I just wonder if he's still playing.
The strange thing about it, I think it was only sort of not tragic, but disappointing because of the things that he was going to do to the Mets record books, the possibility of seeing this translate into a Hall of Fame type of career. So from that perspective, it's disappointing. But you look at David and that I think he's satisfied because he grinded every last ounce out of what his body could do. So sometimes your body's just not meant to hold up. Sometimes, you get lucky like me, and I, had one little minor injury in 20 years of professional baseball. So, guys are different, and that's the amazing thing about a career in professional sports. You got some tortoises, you got some hares, and you got some guys in between. But yeah, absolutely would have been something to see. And look, I think if the spinal stenosis hadn't been a part of his career, yeah, you'd absolutely, I think, still see David Wright playing and producing and being the Mets captain, right now at 38.
Got to hit the home run in the World Series on his way out of the game, so that's pretty good. That took me to kind of a sentimental place thinking about David. And there's another subject, Todd, that I feel kind of emotional about. Can I remind you? It's a reminder to subscribe to Shea Anything at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. And even more important to me, I want to remind you that the Shea Anything Podcast is brought to you by Verizon. That's 5G built right for the Mets from the network that more people rely on. And just, one more dramatic pause to tell you that it's only on Verizon. So I went with excited, the first one, kind of dramatic, the second one, and I decided to go with like slow and emotional for the final time. I'm doing a few more of these while Doug's still off on safari. What would you recommend I go with in terms of that read going forward? Solemn, peppy, or somewhere in between?
If you're asking me,
yeah,
I think the dramatic middle delivery was
okay.
Where to go. Yeah, I think
laying it on a little thick with the emotion.
Yeah, I mean, you do have a flair for the dramatic in your writing and your question asking. So yeah, I think you stay right there.
Todd, and now I will say earnestly.
Plus Doug's peppy. I mean, Doug's on safari because he's going to go out and ride an elephant and whip get a lion. And actually, let's be clear. Doug's not roughing it. He's at some villa in Tuscany right now sipping wine, and as he should be. So, that's always, right. Yeah, always a pleasure to jump on. But I think the dramatic pause, the really dramatic read is where you fit.
That's the way to go. Well, I got to take that advice from you, Todd. In all earnestness, it's been a pleasure to have you here to talk baseball with you. Always learn something every time. And now you have, I think, 9 TV shows for the rest of the day. So we especially appreciate it. If you want to learn more from Todd, just turn on SNY.
My breakdowns on the 3 hitters we talked about.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you could double dip. That's what I've learned. Talk about something on the podcast, write an article. It's a nice double dip. Now you can do the same on your TV show. All right. See you later. Goodbye, everybody.